Now, just a little warning before we begin, there will be major spoilers in this video for the 6th and final episode of the Obi-Wan Kenobi series, so if you have not seen it yet and you don't want anything ruined, it is a really good time to click away. Okay, so once again we had an episode that somehow managed to be really good and enjoyable in some ways, and yet not so good in others. And what you were personally looking for out of this episode, or maybe I should say out of this series in general, will no doubt greatly influence what you thought, whether you loved or hated this, or if you maybe just thought it was kind of decent, or maybe just thought it was kind of just meh. Because if you went into this wanting the rematch of the century between Vader and Kenobi, if that's what you've been looking forward to and waiting for this whole time, and if you're not overly concerned with every tiny little detail of the canon, which is fine if you're not, but do realize some are, and that's okay too. We fans can want completely different things out of the same show, and neither is technically in the wrong. But anyway, if you didn't care so much about this fitting seamlessly between episodes 3 and 4 and just wanted to enjoy the spectacle and have fun with the whole thing, I'd say this episode more or less delivered on that, and you're probably pretty happy with it. I'd even say, judging it on spectacle alone, yes, this was enjoyable. However, if you wanted a truly deep story centered primarily around the character Obi-Wan Kenobi, if you maybe wanted this to be a bit more of a introspect that perhaps had a pinch or two of, oh, I don't know, some Force lore mixed in there for good measure, all the while dodging any and all canon-breaking inconsistencies as if they were landmines, well, you're probably far less happy with this overall. And in my opinion, when it comes to the story here, I don't know that this really, shall we say, ever justified its own existence or really added something crucial to the bigger story. Even though, yes, this final episode did have its moments, it tried to give us at least some depth to the Obi-Wan story and to become something more than just an excuse for Vader and Kenobi to fight again so that they could sell Disney Plus subscriptions. I thought that when Vader said to Kenobi at pretty much the conclusion of their fight, after Vader had a chunk of his helmet removed and we were hearing Hayden's voice, or should I say Obi-Wan was hearing Anakin's voice again. Anyway, I thought that line said by Vader that "you didn't kill Anakin Skywalker, I did," was actually quite brilliant. Not only does that make sense with what Obi-Wan will later say to Luke, that your father was killed, or that the good man who was your father was destroyed by Darth Vader, but it also helped Obi-Wan realize, or was the reason he finally realized after he apologizes initially to Anakin and takes kind of all the blame, that the whole thing wasn't actually his fault, that Anakin deserves the blame for falling to the dark side, that he was the one that made the choice, that Darth Vader was actually his own fault, not Obi-Wan's. That said, I really wish the series had focused more in previous episodes on showing Obi-Wan blaming himself for everything that went wrong with Anakin in order to add to the impact of that moment, of that, again, really good line. I mean, sure, we can certainly assume Obi-Wan feels guilt, and he is dejected in the series, likely because of all that blame and guilt heaped upon himself because of Anakin. But I think there was a lot more that could have and should have been done with that to really show it and really drive it home, that it was the guilt that was truly holding Obi-Wan back and holding him back from finally being able to commune with Qui-Gon and start his Force Ghost training. And this could have easily enough been done or shown through flashbacks and or attempts to speak with Qui-Gon, or even to try and reach out and to speak with Yoda, I suppose. This show could have easily given us some inner monologuing from Obi-Wan to really let us know what he was feeling and going through, and justified it all by him just trying to speak with others through the Force. And most fans would have probably really enjoyed and loved that and appreciated it. Instead, the show seemed afraid to ever go too far into Obi-Wan's actual struggles, as if they didn't trust their audience to accept slowing things down from time to time, and instead expected them to just want more and more action for the sake of action. Which is what the 4th episode of the series felt like, just action for the sake of having an action-packed episode that really added nothing to the bigger story. But anyway, getting back to the big rematch of the century, it did, I suppose, also explain why Obi-Wan thinks of Vader as more machine now than man, as he tells Luke in Return of the Jedi, even though you can argue Obi-Wan could have just as easily come to that conclusion after encountering him in A New Hope. It also, I suppose, explains why Obi-Wan seems to think the only option at that point, when talking to Luke in Return of the Jedi, is for Luke to kill Vader, because Obi-Wan believes Anakin to be completely gone after this encounter in the series. But that does cause a problem or raise a very curious question, which is, why does Kenobi let Darth Vader live? if his friend and brother is truly gone, as he says to him in the episode. And I did like how that mirrored Luke's line again in Return of the Jedi when he says to Vader, "Then my father is truly dead." Anyway, if Kenobi believes nothing is left of Anakin, then why not kill this monster that is more machine than man? This monster that days ago was murdering innocent people in the street just to lure you out of hiding. And yeah, I obviously know he has to let him live. He can't kill Vader. That would break canon more than anything else possibly could. But this is the second time Kenobi has said, "I will do what I must" to Darth Vader, and didn't do what he must. He also said earlier in the episode that this all ends today, that either he dies or I die, and yet he lets him live. Furthermore, he does truly believe now, or is fully convinced, that Anakin is, again, completely dead and gone, that his friend is gone. That is pretty much the whole revelation, not only in this very episode, but the entire series. Him figuring this out is the key moment of the whole story, and as I said earlier, what allows him to let go of all his guilt so he can finally see Qui-Gon Jinn. Obi-Wan fully 100% believes that only the Sith Lord remains, that Darth Vader did indeed kill Anakin, and yet he shows mercy and lets him live. Even though him showing mercy to Anakin in the first place way back on Mustafar, though yes, easier to believe he'd do such a thing at that point, because he'd still want to believe that part of his brother who he loved remains. Anyway, showing mercy is what allows Darth Vader to then go about and do all the horrible things he's been doing and will continue to do now. And yes, him being relieved of the burden of guilt this way is great. I think it works well, and for me it's one of the better moments of the entire series. But him coming to that realization only to show mercy to Vader just doesn't work. Not when he tells Luke later, "You gotta be the one to kill him." And honestly, I think I'd rather have Vader win this fight and leave Kenobi for dead. That would, in some ways, make more sense than Kenobi walking away to let Vader keep bringing suffering to the galaxy. Which isn't to say I have an issue with Kenobi actually beating Vader here, and you could argue it makes more sense this way with him winning, or makes more sense of the "when I left you, I was but the learner" line that Vader says to him in A New Hope. That Vader's hatred for Kenobi, his laser focus on him, is somehow holding him back from reaching his full potential, that he's still a learner this way, which is what seems to be implied when Sidious talks to him at the very end, that his focus on Kenobi is becoming a weakness. Though at the same time, Sidious saying this to him seems like a convenient excuse for why Vader doesn't use Leia to once again lure out Kenobi, knowing that she is the key to finding him, or a key to finding him, after it's what Riva used to do that very thing. But anyway, before getting to those two, before we get to Leia and Riva, again, I didn't have a problem with Kenobi winning the fight so much, though I thought the rock hurling moment might have been a bit much, and though it was awesome to hear Hayden as Vader, and the lines between them were really good, it's kind of the same thing we saw in Rebels, where Ahsoka breaks open the mask, and we do hear the voice of Anakin, though it's Matt Lanter that time, kind of mixed with Vader, and they basically did the same thing again. Though that said, we also had some cool things like Obi-Wan doing his classic pose, which was great, and him calling him Darth just like he did in A New Hope, which helps, I guess, make sense of all of that, or why he would call him Darth as if it were his name, when it's actually, as you all know, kind of his title, even though originally, yes, his name was going to be actually Darth Vader. In other words here, outside of the horrible shaky cam that they used again, the duel between them was visually very impressive and mostly works in the bigger picture, with the most glaring issue being Kenobi just letting Vader live, which again, had to kind of happen that way or be the case unless Vader wins and leaves Kenobi for dead, or Obi-Wan once again leaves him thinking he's all but dead, which you don't think would make sense, that you think if he wanted to kill Vader this time, he would really make sure he did. Either way, at least in this department, it did feel like they, the creators, were aware of all the inconsistencies this encounter creates or could easily create, and did put forth some effort to patch them up or make sense of it all. And I'm not saying they did a perfect job, because they didn't, but they were clearly aware of it, and they did try to make it all make sense, mostly, and to even make sense of things in A New Hope that honestly didn't make a ton of sense originally, or didn't make too much sense after the prequels came out and gave us the full backstory between Anakin and Obi-Wan. But anyway, let's move on from that and get to Riva now, and we'll just leave alone how she got to Tatooine so quickly. Did the Imperials leave her ship behind or something? And we'll not talk about how time and space travel in Star Wars is always as fast or as slow as the plot requires. We'll basically let all of that slide for now. I was just happy to see she was still injured from the stabbing at least, not that she was completely recovered from it in this episode. That said, the problem with Riva here is I didn't even understand what she knows or why she wants to kill Luke. Though I will give them, again, the creators credit for Luke never really seeing Riva or seeing a lightsaber and thus keeping all that consistent with A New Hope, that they actually did rather well with that one, which was a surprise to be sure, but a welcome one. Problem is, it seems like Riva wants to kill Luke to get revenge on Vader, though initially I thought she might want to do it to get revenge on Obi-Wan for the previous episode, because he kind of left her to die after implying they'd fight Vader together. And she kind of figured the boy is someone important to Obi-Wan, that he wants to protect him. Not that it is so important to Vader to find him. Anyway, it turns out she wants to kill Luke to get revenge on Vader, but how or why does she think that'd be revenge? Other than, again, the garbled message she saw of Bail Organa mentioning him or expressing concern that Vader might be after the children, she has no idea why or for what purpose Vader would even want Luke, if he actually truly wants him at all, and if that means he wants him dead or alive. For all she knows, killing Luke is exactly what Vader wants, that she's doing him a favor. Unless she's magically put together that Luke is Anakin's son, which there's nothing to indicate that she'd be able to make that leap. But even if she did, it still wouldn't entirely explain if Vader would want Luke dead or alive, if he maybe sees him as a potential threat to be eliminated, or that he might want to team up with him and capture him and train him to overthrow Sidious one day. Not to mention, just like with Obi-Wan not killing Vader, we know it's something that cannot happen. We know Riva cannot kill Luke, so there's no real tension here at all. And the only interesting part would be how she's stopped from killing him, or why she decides or is convinced not to kill him. And it turns out she comes to it all by herself. No Obi-Wan or anything else is required, just her own better nature taking over after she remembers what happened to her. Which is, I think, supposed to sort of mirror Obi-Wan's very similar choice in this episode to let Darth Vader go, to let him live, even though I will continue to argue that doesn't really make sense. Either way, they're both supposed to be letting go of their anger and their guilt, both towards themselves for failing in their eyes, and towards Vader/Anakin for destroying their lives. This is supposed to be a very profound transformation moment for both of these characters. Problem is, Riva's comes at the expense of Obi-Wan. She could have easily killed Luke had she wanted to, meaning Obi-Wan completely failed his mission to protect Luke, that Luke only survived because Riva doesn't want to be the monster that Vader is, not because of anything Obi-Wan did to change her mind. And this all could have worked to a degree if Kenobi had actually done something or had actually been a part of Riva's turn back to the light side, I suppose. But instead, as already mentioned, he kind of left her for dead, and her going to Tatooine to find and kill Luke, I think, makes more sense if it's revenge against Obi-Wan. It's also kind of strange then for Obi-Wan, after failing to protect Luke, that he goes back to Alderaan and tells Bail that if he ever needs him again, go ahead and just ask. Which sure is meant to kind of be a nod to A New Hope when Bail sends Leia to find him, or when we see it in Rogue One, I guess. And also partly to say that Obi-Wan now trusts Owen and Beru to protect Luke, which he even says to them is the case, though they do actually fail to protect him. Again, it was Riva and Riva alone that saved Luke, not anyone or anything else. And in all reality, Riva's story does come off feeling like almost the focal point of the whole series. It's meant to sort of parallel both Anakin/Vader's story as well as Obi-Wan's. She was able to let go of her anger, as Obi-Wan did, and she was also able to make the choice Anakin could not once upon a time, and she stayed her hand when she had the chance to kill somebody. She rejected the dark side and the monster she could have become, whereas Anakin could not. You could even say she's pretty much shown to be the best of both of them. The opposite then is pretty much true for Leia, because even though on the surface it feels like the series or story is all about her, it's really not. She's mainly acting as a plot device, meant to move Kenobi from place to place and to eventually get him to face Darth Vader. For better or worse, she is the reason why pretty much everything happens to him in the entire series. She is even a big part of his change, when he is thinking of her as he is using his strength to break free from the rock prison that Darth Vader has buried him in, after Vader had the high ground on him. The other sort of issue with Leia is, of course, what I've discussed multiple times before, that she and her father should be known Jedi sympathizers after all of this. They should be seen as traitors to the Empire and then pretty much executed, right? But for some reason, they won't be, and this whole thing will be forgotten or overlooked, when at the very least they should be carefully watched by the Empire henceforth. But of course, why that happens or doesn't happen kind of gets explained away by a throwaway line, which I predicted would probably be the case, that Bail would quickly say something that would explain why the Empire would leave them alone. And in this case, it's that the Empire is only getting stronger and bolder, which implies they can't move against an Imperial Senator without there being consequences, I guess. And so even though this episode does a semi-decent job of covering up plot holes between Kenobi and Vader, and knowing me, I'll probably go more into that in a different video. Anyway, though we can almost make sense of all of that, we still can't make sense of why Leia doesn't seem to know Obi-Wan in A New Hope, or why Obi-Wan doesn't consider Leia an option for training in The Empire Strikes Back. And yes, I realize we have Obi-Wan telling Leia that they have to be careful now, that no one can know that they know each other, that it's dangerous for both of them, and that is why I guess she sends such an impersonal message to him in A New Hope. Problem is, that message already gets her into big trouble and implicates her and her father with being aligned with the Jedi and moving against the Empire in general, trying to get the plans to the rebellion, for crying out loud. Whether or not she mentions that she and Kenobi were friends or pleads to him based on them being friends is pretty irrelevant if the Empire gets their hands on that message. Moving on here, I'd say my favorite part of the episode had to be seeing Qui-Gon Jinn again. He is one of my favorite Jedis and one of my favorite characters in all of Star Wars, and so yes, I will take that nostalgia bait and eat it up, even though it is something that should have been seen in this series anyway. And we did literally see him, despite in the Clone Wars learning he could not fully manifest as a Force ghost, that his training wasn't complete, and I'm going to assume he has since completed that training, which sure is fine considering he exists in a place that is non-linear, and he has plenty of time there. Either way, I liked how it was handled, that he kind of gives Obi-Wan a hard time about how long it took. Just a shame we couldn't see more between these two as Obi-Wan learns some secrets of the Force. Another thing I liked is that the Grand Inquisitor actually kind of questioned Darth Vader, that he pointed out that going after the Jedi was not worth giving up the others, which, though I'm not sure I agree with that assessment, I think one Jedi, especially a Jedi Master and former Council member, is more important than a bunch of refugees. But I still thought it was a nice moment, and the fact that Vader tolerated it shows that he does have respect for the Grand Inquisitor. The real problem with it is that, they do have these things called TIE fighters that they could have sent out after the other ship while the Star Destroyer turned and chased Kenobi's smaller ship. They could have disabled it and then came back for it later with, again, TIE fighters. But, Vader is, I guess, way too focused on Kenobi to even think of that. And the Grand Inquisitor didn't want to go that far, I suppose. It was also nice to finally get a hello there from Kenobi. I felt like that just needed to happen at some point. And no, I don't think this meeting between him and Luke breaks anything between them. I don't think this means Luke should think of old Ben as anything more than that strange old hermit that lives out beyond the Dune Sea, the one who gave him a T-16 Skyhopper toy once upon a time that he still plays with when he's like 19, but whatever. There were then plenty of other little things, both good and bad, that sure could be brought up and gone over, but this video is running long, so I'll start to wrap this up by saying that overall, the episode, like the series as a whole, was a bit of a mixed bag for me. You can love it, you can hate it, that's fine. But with me, I don't know, it just struggles to justify its own existence. It struggles to be anything more than a reason to have a rematch of the century between Obi-Wan and Vader. And in my opinion, it doesn't add anything all that important to the greater story. I don't know that things in A New Hope, all their lines now make more sense, and like I said, I'll probably do a whole video covering that pretty soon. But either way, I just can't help but feel like the starting point, the original idea to do this, was how can we get these two together again to fight? Not how can we create a good, nuanced story that really focuses in on Obi-Wan and maybe Anakin and Vader. Or if they ask themselves if the series was ever needed in the first place, if despite how much fans wanted to see this, some things are indeed best left alone, or if something smaller in scale would have just worked better, something where Obi-Wan never leaves Tatooine, or if going the opposite route would have been better, something bigger that Kenobi is just, or was just, a small part of. Well, that's all I've got for this time. Now it's your turn to take to the comments below and tell me what you thought of this final episode, and I will once again be responding to some of those comments in a video over on my second channel, which should be up sometime tomorrow. Either way, tell me what you thought, let's talk some Star Wars, and until next time, thanks for watching.